In order to understand our events that are happening today, we have to go back in time on our show and also in history to get the big picture, okay? I've been telling you for some time that if they continue to pursue arresting Donald Trump, it will precipitate the destruction of the uniparty and the D.C. establishment faster than they can possibly imagine, barring violent reciprocal action, okay? And even if there is violent reciprocity, it still will end up, in the long run, being a move that is consequential in its destruction of the elitists running D.C. So here's what I mean by this. I've told you before that we are swimming in the fishbowl inaugurated by Jesus, okay? If you have to understand that this is a big picture show, Jesus destroyed the cosmic powers of sacrificial violence, and he did so with a calling card that said, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, right? This idea that that which becomes perceived as rejected and scapegoated and vilified becomes the foundation stone, becomes the magnetic fixation of the masses for meaning and order. Wherever the story of Jesus haunts a society long enough, that society has to wrestle with the ways in which they have come together in the past. In ancient societies, they did sacrifice. One was killed for the many to get their angers, their resentments, to project all their wickedness onto the back of a common enemy. The Greeks did it. It was called Pharmakon, the ritual by which they would take someone who was handicapped or disfigured or disabled or different in some way, and they would parade them around the community before sending them off to die or killing them. This is an old pharmaceutical antidote to chaos, right? So when you see what's happening today, or unfolding starting yesterday, which is the raid of Mar-a-Lago and President Trump's home here in Florida, you have to understand that this is a process that has been going on for 2,000 years. Human societies are always looking for scapegoats. They're always looking for a monster to create order and meaning in the destruction of that monster. A more common modern term might be witch hunts, right? You hear even President Trump and his supporters, they talk about witch hunts. This is a witch hunt, right? Witch hunt is a modern version, a modern turn of phrase that is describing the process that I'm telling you about of a scapegoat attack. Common enemy uniting the community together. But here's the thing that Jesus is talking about. Ever since Jesus died on the cross and revealed that he was the ultimate scapegoat, that he was the ultimate sacrificial lamb, that he was the one versus the many, that the many came together and killed their one scapegoat to create catharsis, to create peace, to create order, to create unity, to shame him for their sins, to project their guilt onto him. All of that happened in history, and as the story of that event spreads through the world, it comes with repercussions to the lands that learn of this event in history. And one of those repercussions is that you cannot continue to do sacrificial violence against common scapegoats the way in which it was done to Jesus. That the more you continue to scapegoat in the light of your culture being exposed to the gospel, that Jesus died on the cross for the sins of the world and for the sins of his own community, for the sins of those who did not know what they were doing in their killing of him, that we would start to learn what we were doing in the killing of others around our history. We would start to have reservations about burning witches to get the water to come. We would start to have reservations about saying, off with the head of the aristocrats, off with the head of the peasant, off with the head of whoever. We thought it was okay to do collective violence if everybody was doing it with us. And Jesus said, the story that I'm going to enact for you in my life is going to spread like a yeast in the loaf of a bread, of a nice loaf of bread. Through history, a slow process unwinding itself in fits and starts. And that one of the repercussions of that story infecting your culture is that the longer you persist in trying to scapegoat to create unanimity and consensus and togetherness, the more it would backfire and create division, separation, schism. And ultimately, those who are perceived to be the victims will have their own power the more people perceive them being victimized unjustly. And so I'm telling you this is an analysis of events that does not require you to love or hate President Trump or anything else. This is an anthropological evaluation of where we're at in light of the Gospels. And the truth is that going after a former president, the first president in decades to not start a new war, by the way, the first president ever to pass criminal justice reform. Interesting factoids there. First president to be elected who wasn't a general or politician from that governing class prior to becoming president is now the first president to be raided by D.C.'s Praetorian Guard, which is what it's become. This is a symbolic move. This is not a show of strength. This is a show of desperation. In the minds of the people doing it, they may feel as if this is a show of strength, but in reality, the subconscious, this is a show of desperation, like a cornered animal that's afraid that the people are starting to wake up to how crooked of a deal the uniparty has been treating them like for decades and decades and decades. Wicked wars, unjust civil liberties violations, unjust warrantless searches, unjust imprisonment, unjust theft from the middle class and the poor to the rich through the Federal Reserve System, inflating money, debasing our currency, debasing our savings account, creating artificial boom-bust cycles that ends up stripping the middle class and the poor of their wealth. All of that is culminating. The more people have access to decentralized information, decentralized media nodes of knowledge, the more people are starting to wake up and say, I don't like what both parties are offering, and I want some sanity. I want some boundaries put back in place before these lawless anarchists in D.C. torch the whole country of everything of its worth and value. And so when you see them saying, okay, well, now we're going to violate another standard of decorum. Now we're going to violate another standard of decency. Now we're going to violate another standard of norm. They are breaking their own rules to try to blot out their scapegoat. They are terrified of Trump's movement more than they are terrified of Trump. They are terrified of Trump in the sense that he goes off script too much. He is not a dependable mouthpiece for the establishment, despite the fact that much of his policies continued the steady state of D.C.'s encroachment and expansion of power and debt and growth and bureaucrats and so forth and so on. He's the one that put Chris Wray in the FBI director's role as he goes now and executes this raid on the man's house. He put those people in place. So he barely did anything to scratch the surface, but his rhetoric was too much off script for a city that depends on the narrative being played out by both sides in a very controlled manner. Like pro wrestling, you've got to stay on the script. This one says this one says this one, but we don't go outside the bounds of the story. And Trump was too much of a loose cannon, and he still is too much of a loose cannon. And now he's even more of a threat because he's seen how the system works. And now if he were to run again, he wouldn't have to worry about the political mindset of saying, well, I've got to go easy on my first term so then I can do what I really want in the second term, which is what most presidents end up thinking like when they get into office. So he's a risk too far for the establishment, which wants perpetual mouthpiece conformity for big pharma's interests, for big military's interests, big multinational corporations, big Wall Street, all these things. They want someone who stays on script. I mean, we just heard Steve Bannon, and maybe you didn't, but he spoke at CPAC in Dallas just before this raid saying in his culmination of his speech that we need to abolish the Federal Reserve System. Now, whether he means it or not, whether they care what he says or not, when you normalize things like that, taking on the Federal Reserve System, which is the heart of the power of the corporatists running this country into the ground for their obscene profits, when you start having, one of the right-hand men of Donald Trump, one of the people who is credited to be one of his intellectual allies for his movement, and he's saying we need to abolish the Federal Reserve, and not only does he say it in a passing thing, but he makes it the culmination of his speech at CPAC before Trump speaks. That is rhetoric that they don't want to normalize. They like to move the Overton window towards, hey, let's just have bathrooms for adults that identify as female. Okay, got that. Now let's do that for kids. Now let's say, hey, if your kindergartner feels a little strange or different, go ahead and give them hormone therapy. I mean, you see how they move that Overton window all day long towards nihilism. But they don't want that Overton window moved along the way towards things that would result in potential deep, deep liberty and deep, deep trouble for those who have been hiding and destroying our liberty and destroying our wealth for their own self-gain. They can't afford to have that kind of rhetorical energy normalized and allowed back into the seat of power. You cannot have someone, if you're a DC creature, you cannot have someone in power whose right-hand intellectual guy like Bannon is saying, hey, let's abolish the Federal Reserve, and in bringing history back into the consciousness of the mainstream. He's bringing, in his speech, again, it doesn't matter whether they believe he believes it or whether he believes it or not. You are normalizing information and narratives that are not acceptable for those who depend on a big government and a big business crony connection system that cannot be disturbed with narratives, with information that would mess up their steady state of decay. Decay for us, profiteering for them. So when you see them trying to do this stuff, like, it's all about the visual. This is all about the aesthetic. It's all about saying, you know what? We'll show you. Don't you ever vote for somebody who's talking about ending wars and doesn't start a new war. Yeah, you got to vote for Obama, but Obama was a very, very, very obedient corporatist, right? He was very, very obedient to the establishment narratives of both sides of the political game. He was very obedient to it. So he played the rhetoric, and then guess what? He started all the wars up. And Trump didn't end the wars as fast as I wanted or would have desired, but he didn't start new wars. And he kept criticizing and bringing up the revolving door relationship between the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex while he was president. You're not allowed to do that. You can't do that and have access to DC's game. And so this event is trying to tell the public, don't you ever think about voting for someone who is serious about their rhetoric so much that they will continue it even in the White House. Don't you ever vote for someone who thinks even slightly off the reservation of D.C. in the terms of saying, hey, I'm willing to do things like not start new wars. I'm willing to look at trade deals that are rigged. I'm willing to, go through some things that are considered to be sacred cows that you're not allowed to touch. They can't afford it. They feel like they're exposed too much already because of a variety of things that the digital age has opened up in terms of multi-perspectives on what they're doing coming to the people. And so this is a symbolic event to say, look, we're bringing order back. We are not going to let you have a president like that. And we want you to know, this is what they're also telling you, we want you to feel bad This is what their attempt is, to make you feel bad if you voted for Donald Trump, or even if you didn't vote for Donald Trump, that you didn't hate him like they do. They want you to feel bad, because that's what happens when you have a scapegoating event. It's designed so that when you see that scapegoat being sacked, if you see them being raided or paraded or shamed in these public rituals, it's designed to make you feel that pool of, oh man, I don't want to be caught up in that ugly energy, that shame energy that they have. I don't want to have that stick on me. I want to have a happy job. I want to be safe. I don't want to be scrutinized. I don't want to have nothing happen to me. I want to have a peaceful little life in the herd. Nobody bothers me. Happy, happy, happy. They know that that's a human phenomenon that all people have. And so that's very much in play when they want to make these symbolic moves, ostensibly about some kind of document. You know, presidents are supposed to have the ability to declassify what they want. But that's the opportunity to go on a fishing expedition, to get through all his documents, see what else they can find, to see what they can get to stick. And fundamentally, it's about a story about saying, hey, we're still in power. Don't you ever think about voting or hiring or supporting someone who goes off script rhetorically and who goes off some of the policy standards, even by 10% difference. We want perpetual war. We want perpetual handouts to Big Pharma. We want perpetual surveillance, perpetual exploitation, regime change chaos. We want perpetual Federal Reserve rigged crony capitalism. We want it. And if you want to mess with us, we're going to make you look bad. We're going to go after your people. We're going to go after a billionaire who is a kind of superhero figure for his fans, to let you know that you can't do anything to us. And they also like the added benefit that an event like this can stir people who are already in a state of alienation and desperation to feel the need to reciprocate with aggression back. They love that January 6th. Boy, they love that. They love Ray Epps the most. He's like the one that gets all the great accolades as the one who was telling them all to jump in that Capitol. But they love that January 6th thing. That thing was amazing to them. They love to see visuals of the peasants rising up so they can justify being more violent, more brutal, more disgusting and divisive in the rhetoric. And so you can't play into that game ever. You have to choose the way of Christ, which is nonviolent resistance, nonviolence, peace, love. His way will win. It is bigger than Trump. It is bigger than anything that's ever come in history. Jesus' personhood revolution is the winning ticket. They don't want you to ever go close to that. That's the top shelf power that they can't even fathom how to deal with. But they spend all their time imitating it with rip-off frauds of saying, oh, we're the victims and we're just trying to protect the little people. No, you're not protecting anybody. You are stealing from the people. You are stealing. DC is stealing. And they know it. And they know that we're increasingly knowing it. They know that it's become more and more of a normie thing to think of DC in a weird way. DC likes to pretend like they're a Mickey Mouse thing. It's just a happy-go-lucky little thing. Everybody's happy. We're just trying to do good things. No, you are not. You're scoundrels, and we all know it. And they know that we know it, and so they're constantly trying to change the story or to incite people into demoralization, into deep giving up, submitting, or their favorite, reciprocating with aggression. They love those stories the most. Because if you're a violence-driven entity and you're the monopoly of that, you love it when somebody tries to reciprocate your way of being with a violent return, because then they get to say, ooh, that justifies us to go even vicious and more nasty and more ugly and more disgusting and stinky and filthy and satanic. And so you always must never give in to the false Satan, casting out Satan dynamic of reciprocal aggression when things are oppressive or things feel demoralizing. But always remember that what Jesus said, that the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, means that they will never succeed in being able to do their power plays of, beating their chest and raiding people that oppose their preferred political paradigm. That will always backfire. That will always create, there's so many people If they keep this persecution up of Donald Trump, I told you this years ago, and I'll tell you it again, if they keep this up, it will continue to make moderates and independents, people of all backgrounds, blacks, Hispanics, Asians. It'll make people who are even illegal aliens coming in start to say, I like this Donald Trump more and more. You're going to see more and more people say, I don't like this overreach. This is brazen scapegoating. And that's what Jesus means when he says the stone the builders reject has become the cornerstone. When people start to believe that someone's an unfair scapegoat, they rally to their side, to the scapegoat side. And that is the narrative power that they cannot overcome. And they do everything they can to usually play within that game as much as they can and to fraudulently try to look like they're on the side of the victims and the little people, but they're not. And when they do these kind of power plays, the mask slips and people see what they're up to more and more clearly than ever before.